Why are all my friends mad at me? Every single friend I had unfollowed me overnight, and when I texted our group chat asking what happened, 5 people read it without responding. I called Stella and she sent me straight to voicemail. Then Joey blocked my number and Harper wouldn't answer, and suddenly 10 people had cut me off at the exact same time. The night before at Zoe's apartment, everything had been perfect. We'd laughed at inside jokes and taken photos we'd never post. I called Zoe since it was her party, and maybe something had happened after I left. She answered, but when she heard my voice, she said, "Please don't contact me again," and hung up. I texted asking what I'd done wrong, and she blocked me immediately. My hands were shaking as I tried to figure out what could have possibly happened in the 8 hours since I'd left her apartment. I went through my phone looking for clues about what I might have done. My last photo showed me with Harper and Mia all smiling with our arms around each other at midnight. By morning, they'd both unfollowed me and removed me from their followers. Something had happened in those few hours while I was sleeping, but I had no idea what. I drove to Stella's apartment because we'd been best friends for 8 years, and she'd at least tell me what was wrong. She answered the door but held it mostly closed, like I might try to force my way in. When I asked what I'd done, she said, "You know what you did," and shut the door in my face. I stood there knocking for 5 minutes, but she never answered again. I tried reaching out to peripheral friends who weren't at the party to see if they knew anything. Clara said she'd heard about what happened but didn't want to get involved. When I begged her to just tell me, she said it wasn't her place and blocked me too. Everyone knew something except me, and it was making me feel insane. I went through every conversation from the party trying to remember if I'd said something offensive. We'd talked about work drama and dating apps and this show we all watched. I'd made the same dumb jokes I always made, and everyone had laughed. I'd only had 2 drinks over 4 hours, so I wasn't even drunk. I checked social media to see if someone had posted something about me. There was nothing with my name, but all my friends had posted photos from the party with me cropped out or carefully angled to exclude me. In Mia's story, you could see my hand holding a drink, but the rest of me was cut off. They were erasing me from the night. I texted Harper begging for an explanation, and she replied with just, "Check your email." I went through every email account I had but found nothing unusual. Just work stuff and promotional emails, and nothing that would explain why 10 people simultaneously decided to hate me. When I told her there was nothing, she said, "Then you deleted it," and blocked me. I tried to think if someone could have spread a rumor about me, but what could be so bad that everyone would believe it without even asking my side? These were people who knew everything about me, including actually terrible things I'd done, and they'd never judged me before. This felt different and worse. I even called my ex thinking maybe he'd said something to them, but he was as confused as me. He said Zoe had called him asking weird questions about our relationship, but wouldn't say why. She'd wanted to know if I'd ever done anything he'd found disturbing, which was such a strange word choice that it stuck with him. After 3 days of complete exile, I was losing my mind. I couldn't eat or sleep properly, and I'd called in sick to work because I couldn't focus on anything. These were the people I'd spent every weekend with for years, and now they acted like I was dangerous. Even seeing me at the door had made Stella nervous. Finally, Autumn agreed to meet me at a coffee shop, but only in public and only for 5 minutes. She looked scared sitting across from me, which made no sense because we'd been friends since college. She said everyone had seen proof of what I'd done and there was no coming back from it. When I asked what proof, she said the less I knew, the safer everyone would be. I begged her to just tell me what they thought I'd done so I could at least defend myself. She looked around the coffee shop like someone might be watching and then pulled out her phone. She showed me a screenshot of a text that had been sent from my number at 3 a.m. after the party, but I'd been asleep by then. The message was just an address I didn't recognize and the words, "It's done." Below that was a photo I definitely hadn't taken. It was Stella's bedroom, which I'd been in 100 times, but the angle was from her closet looking out at her sleeping in bed. The timestamp showed 3:15 a.m. when I was home asleep in my own bed 20 minutes away. I kept staring at the phone screen even though my brain wouldn't accept what I was seeing. Autumn shifted in her seat and pulled the phone back into her lap. She glanced around the coffee shop again and said she had to go. I asked her to wait, but she was already standing up and grabbing her bag. She said she was sorry, but she couldn't be seen with me any longer than necessary. I watched her walk out the door and leave me sitting alone at the table with my coffee getting cold. My hands were still shaking as I grabbed my keys and headed for my car. I drove straight home and ran up the stairs to my apartment 2 at a time. I checked every window to see if any were unlocked or showed signs of being forced open. I looked at the door frame for scratches or marks around the lock. I got down on my hands and knees to check for footprints or dirt that shouldn't be there. I went through every room looking for anything out of place or moved. My bedroom window was locked just like I'd left it. The sliding door to the balcony still had the stick in the track. Nothing was disturbed, and that made everything feel worse somehow. I pulled out my phone and called my carrier to ask about the text that was sent at 3 a.m. The customer service person said they could see regular texts but not iMessages on my account. She explained that iMessages go through Apple's servers instead of the phone company. She suggested I check my Apple ID to see what devices were connected to my account. Something cold spread through my chest when she said that. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately opened my phone settings. I went to screen time and saw my phone had been in sleep focus mode from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. that night. The health app showed I hadn't even gotten up to use the bathroom between midnight and morning. I took screenshots of everything showing the sleep focus and the health data. I needed proof I was home and asleep, even if nobody wanted to look at it. The next morning, I wrote Stella a letter explaining I had evidence someone else sent those messages. I drove to her building and slipped the letter under her door. I went back to my car and sat there for an hour watching her window. She never came out or even looked through the blinds. My phone rang and I saw it was work calling about my 3rd day of absence. I told my manager I was dealing with a personal emergency that I couldn't explain yet. She said HR wanted to check in with me about taking some time off properly. She said they were worried about me and needed to know when I'd be back. I realized this whole thing was spreading into every part of my life now. I told her I'd call HR later and hung up feeling even more overwhelmed. I pulled out the screenshot of the text with the address and decided to drive there myself. It took 20 minutes to get to the industrial part of town I never went to. The address led me to a storage facility called Secure Space with rows of orange garage doors. The office was closed since it was after hours, but I took photos of everything. I got pictures of the building and the unit numbers I could see from the parking lot. I came back the next morning when the facility opened and went into the office. The woman at the desk asked if I needed to rent a unit. I explained I was trying to find out who rented a specific unit for a police matter. She shook her head and said she couldn't give out any customer information without a police report. She said it was company policy and there was nothing she could do to help me. I left feeling more frustrated than when I'd arrived. I drove straight to the police station and waited 40 minutes to talk to someone. The officer listened while I explained someone was impersonating me digitally and stalking my friends. I showed him the screenshots Autumn had shared with me on her phone. He took notes and started a report, but warned these cases were really hard to prove. He said digital harassment happens all the time, but getting enough evidence takes work. He gave me a case number and said a detective would follow up in a few days. I sat in my car in the police station parking lot and thought about who might help me. I remembered Brennan from accounting had helped me fix my laptop last year when it got infected. He knew about computers and might be able to find something on my devices. I texted him asking if he could look at my phone and computer for anything suspicious. I said something weird was happening with my accounts and I needed technical help. He replied within 10 minutes saying he was curious what was going on. We agreed to meet at a Starbucks near the office the next afternoon. Brennan showed up with his laptop and a bunch of cables and started asking questions about my accounts while he plugged my phone into his computer. He pulled up some program with green text scrolling across a black screen and started typing commands I didn't understand. After about 10 minutes, he stopped typing and turned the laptop toward me and pointed at a line showing an iPad had been active on my account yesterday, even though I hadn't touched mine in months. I remembered leaving my old iPad at Zoe's place back in spring when we were binge-watching that show about the cult, and I'd brought it over so we could look up stuff about the real story while we watched. He asked if I'd ever given anyone my passwords or let them help set up my devices. And that's when I remembered Zoe had helped me set up that same iPad when I first got it because she was always better with tech stuff than me. She'd also used my Netflix password last year when her account got hacked, and I'd never changed it after. Brennan clicked through more screens and showed me the device history, and there it was clear as day that the iPad had been turned on 3 weeks ago for the first time in months. 3 whole weeks before the party, which meant someone had been planning this for a while, and it wasn't just some drunk mistake or heat of the moment thing. This was planned out and prepared, and that made my stomach hurt even worse than before. I asked Brennan to remove the iPad from my account right then, and he did it while also changing all my passwords to random strings of letters and numbers he wrote down for me. Later that night, I borrowed my neighbor's phone since mine was compromised and texted Zoe saying I needed my iPad back for a work project and asking when I could pick it up. The message showed as read almost immediately, and then within 2 minutes the number was blocked, which felt like the biggest admission of guilt I could imagine. I took screenshots of everything and forwarded it all to Autumn with a message explaining I wasn't asking her to pick sides, but just wanted her to see the evidence that someone else had access to my accounts. She replied after about an hour saying she'd been thinking about how weird Zoe had been acting at the party, and how she kept checking her phone every few minutes even during conversations. Then Autumn called me and her voice was shaky as she told me there were way more messages than just the storage facility text, because apparently over the past few weeks, several friends had gotten creepy DMs from my accounts. Some were just weird comments on old photos, but others were darker stuff she didn't want to repeat, and my whole body felt cold hearing this had been going on for weeks without me knowing. I told Autumn I knew I'd had some awkward moments over the years, and maybe misread signals sometimes, but I'd never sent threatening messages or taken secret photos of anyone. She said, "I know that's why this whole thing felt wrong," and I could hear her crying a little bit on the other end. The next day, Brennan texted asking me to come back to the coffee shop because he'd found something else, and when I got there, he showed me how my Apple ID recovery email had been changed 2 weeks ago, then switched back almost immediately. The IP address from that change traced to the neighborhood right by the storage facility, which was way too specific to be coincidence. I decided to drive around that area myself to see what was there, and found this shipping store that had signs advertising private mailbox rentals and workspace access by the hour. The clerk at the counter confirmed they had lots of customers who paid cash for mailboxes and used the address for package deliveries, and I took photos of everything including the sign showing their hours. Walking back to my car, I felt my phone buzz with an alert about an unknown AirTag moving with me, which made no sense until I looked under my car and found one tucked up behind my rear wheel well. My hands were shaking as I used a tissue to pull it out and put it in a plastic bag because someone had been tracking everywhere I went and I had no idea for how long. I drove straight to the police station and gave them the AirTag, and they said they'd run the serial number to try to trace who bought it. The detective told me to start varying my routes to work and checking my car regularly, because this kind of escalation usually meant someone was worried about what I might find. He said whoever was doing this was getting nervous about my investigation, which meant I was probably getting close to something important. I spent that whole afternoon at the hardware store buying new locks and a doorbell camera, then came home and installed everything myself while watching YouTube tutorials. The locksmith wanted $300 to come out, but the locks only cost $60, and I figured out how to do it myself in about 2 hours. I changed my phone number too and only gave it to Brennan, my parents, and work, because I needed to control who could reach me. That evening, I sat at my computer and typed up an email to Stella with all my router logs attached, the device evidence showing the iPad at Zoe's, and my police report number. I kept it short and factual without begging or trying to convince her of anything, just laying out the information so she could decide what to do with it. The next morning, I woke up to her response and my hands were shaking as I opened it. She said there were screenshots of messages calling her horrible things that she was too scared to even repeat, messages that made her afraid I might actually hurt her. Reading that made me feel sick because someone had used my identity to terrorize my best friend, and I understood why she'd been so scared when I showed up at her door. I wrote back saying I understood her fear, and included more evidence about the iPad being active when I was asleep. Brennan texted me later suggesting we export my entire message history from my phone backup to prove those awful texts never came from my actual device. We met at his place, and the process took almost 4 hours of going through iCloud backups and creating time-stamped proof of every real message I'd ever sent. The export showed exactly when each message was sent, and from which device, creating a clear record that those threatening messages weren't in my actual phone history. I forwarded the whole message export file to Autumn, asking her to share it with anyone willing to look at real evidence instead of just screenshots. She replied saying Harper might be willing to meet if I could prove I was actually home that night when the messages were sent. I called my ex and asked if he'd write a statement about being at my apartment until 1 a.m. since he'd come over after the party to return some stuff he'd borrowed. He agreed immediately and mentioned that Zoe had called him 3 times in the past week, asking really weird questions about whether I'd ever scared him or done anything violent. He said the calls got stranger each time, with her pressing for any story about me losing my temper or acting aggressive, even though that had never happened in our 2 years together. He emailed me the statement that afternoon, confirming my car was still in the parking lot when he left at 1 a.m. and that I'd been yawning the whole time he was there. Autumn texted me 2 days later saying she'd arranged a meeting with Harper at this busy restaurant downtown, where we'd both feel safe in public. I printed out all my evidence and put it in a folder, trying to look calm even though my heart was pounding as I walked in. Harper was already sitting at a corner table and she looked nervous but agreed to look at what I'd brought. She pulled out her phone and showed me the full message thread from that night, which was way worse than what Autumn had shown me. There were multiple photos from inside Stella's apartment taken at different angles and messages about watching her sleep and knowing her schedule. Looking at them made me feel nauseous because they were so creepy and invasive, but then I noticed something in one photo that made me freeze completely. On the shelf in Stella's closet was this ceramic cat figurine that I recognized immediately because Zoe had given it to Stella for her birthday last year. I remembered because we'd all gone to this craft fair together and spent an hour looking for the perfect gift, and Zoe had picked that specific cat. The photographer had known exactly where to find that gift on the shelf, which meant they were familiar with both Stella's apartment and the history of that figurine. Harper asked what I was staring at, and I pointed out the cat, explaining how Zoe had bought it and would know exactly where Stella kept it. She looked skeptical, but I could see her thinking about it as I pulled up Instagram on my phone to show her something else. I found Zoe's profile and scrolled back to a post from 2 weeks ago, where she was unboxing some packages she'd ordered online. In the background of one photo, you could see packaging for a Wi-Fi security camera, the kind you can monitor from your phone. The timeline matched perfectly with when the iPad had been reactivated on my account, according to the device logs Brennan had found. Harper stared at the photo for a long time, and then looked back at the creepy messages on her phone, comparing the dates. Harper kept switching between the photos and the Instagram post for another minute before setting her phone down on the table between us. She said she needed to think about this and got up to leave without even finishing her coffee. I drove straight to Brennan's apartment with my laptop and asked him to run one more test that might prove everything. He opened his laptop and had me turn off all my devices completely, then watched as he sent test messages to my iMessage account from his phone. The messages showed as delivered and read even though my phone was powered off and sitting on his coffee table. He documented everything in screenshots and typed up a technical report explaining how this proved another device was logged into my account when those creepy messages were sent. I took the report home and stared at it for a while before opening iMessage on my laptop and typing out a message to my old iPad that I knew someone might see. I wrote that I was going to the storage facility tomorrow with police to check their security footage and hit send, hoping whoever had the device would panic. The message showed as read within 5 minutes. The next morning, I called Autumn and asked if she'd come with me to the storage place that afternoon, not mentioning my real plan to just watch the entrance. She agreed, and we met at a gas station nearby before driving over in my car. We parked across the street where we could see everyone coming and going from the facility. For 2 hours, we sat there eating snacks from the gas station and watching cars pull in and out. We didn't see Zoe, but this one silver sedan kept driving through the lot without stopping at any units, circling 3 times before finally leaving. Autumn took photos of the license plate on her phone. The next day, I went to the storage facility alone and asked to speak with the manager about my police case. He pulled up something on his computer and confirmed the police request had come through for their records. He said their logs showed someone accessed the facility at 2:45 a.m. the night of the party, which was 30 minutes before that creepy text was sent from my account. Privacy laws meant he couldn't tell me who it was, but when I mentioned it was part of my police investigation, he nodded like he understood what I was asking. On the drive home, Autumn called and said she'd been thinking about something weird from the past month. Zoe had been talking a lot about protecting the friend group from toxic people and setting better boundaries, but everyone thought she meant her ex-boyfriend who'd been bothering her. Now Autumn wondered if Zoe had been talking about me the whole time, preparing everyone to cut me off. I felt sick thinking about Zoe planning this for weeks while acting normal to my face. That afternoon, I drove to Stella's building and asked the property manager if I could submit a request to review their guest entry logs, showing her my police report number. She said she'd need to check with their legal team first, but seemed willing to help since it involved a police investigation. I filled out the formal request form and left my contact information, hoping they'd get back to me soon. 2 days passed before I heard anything, and then Harper texted Autumn telling her she needed to stop helping me because it wasn't safe, and everyone needed to maintain distance from me. Autumn screenshotted the message and sent it to me immediately, saying she wasn't going to abandon me when all the evidence kept supporting my story. She said Harper sounded scared in the message, like someone was pressuring her to send it. 3 days after I submitted the request, Stella's building management finally called back. The woman on the phone said they'd reviewed their electronic entry logs and found that a guest access code linked to Zoe's phone number was used at 2:47 a.m. the night of the party. She emailed me a copy of the entry log with the official building letterhead, and it was the first real proof that actually placed someone at the scene when those photos were taken. My hands were shaking as I forwarded the building entry log to Stella with a simple message asking her to check her closet for anything unusual. I promised I wouldn't contact her again if she didn't want me to, but suggested she bring building security with her if she was scared to look alone. I didn't beg or plead, just sent the evidence and waited. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from Stella. Her message was short, just saying she was scheduling a closet inspection with building maintenance present for safety, but it was huge. It was the first time since this started that she'd actually engaged with my evidence instead of just dismissing everything I said. I wanted to reply and thank her, but decided to respect her boundaries and not push for more communication. Instead, I texted Autumn the update, and she said this was progress, that once Stella found whatever was in that closet, everything would change. We both knew something was hidden there because those photos had been taken from inside it, and whoever took them had to leave some kind of camera or device behind. The waiting was killing me, but I had to let Stella do this at her own pace, had to let her discover the truth for herself, because she wouldn't believe it coming from me. The next morning, Autumn called while I was making coffee and told me Joey and Mia were completely shutting down any discussion about me in the group chat. She said Zoe kept sending these long messages about staying strong against manipulation and protecting each other from toxic people who would try to divide them. The way Autumn described it made it sound like Zoe was running some kind of campaign to keep everyone scared of me. I could hear the exhaustion in Autumn's voice as she explained how the group was splitting into 2 camps, with some people starting to ask questions but others too scared to even consider that maybe they'd been wrong. After we hung up, I met Brennan at his apartment where he'd set up his dining table with all the evidence we'd collected over the past weeks. He had his laptop open and was organizing everything into folders like we were preparing for a court case. We spent 3 hours putting together a packet with the device logs showing my iPad had been used without my knowledge, the building entry records proving someone used Zoe's code at Stella's place that night, the AirTag serial number from when someone was tracking my car, and a detailed timeline of everything that had happened. Brennan printed multiple copies and put them in clear plastic folders with tabs marking each section like exhibits in a legal brief. He even created a cover sheet with references to each piece of evidence and where it came from. I was checking my phone, constantly hoping to hear from Stella about the closet inspection, when finally around 2 in the afternoon, a text came through that made my stomach drop. She'd sent a photo of her closet with building maintenance standing beside her, and there between 2 wooden slats was this tiny black device about the size of a button. Her message said she was crying and felt sick knowing someone had been watching her sleep, and she didn't know how long it had been there, broadcasting everything. The maintenance guy was wearing gloves and carefully removing it while Stella stood back looking pale. Within an hour, police were at Stella's apartment bagging the camera as evidence and taking photos of where it had been hidden. The detective called me while they were still there, and his voice was different, more serious than before. He said finding the camera changed everything from a harassment case to potential felony charges for stalking and unauthorized surveillance. He asked if I could bring the evidence packet Brennan and I had compiled to the station that afternoon. I grabbed the folders and drove straight there, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. At the station, the detective went through each document carefully, taking notes and asking questions about dates and times. He said the camera was still transmitting when they found it, and their tech team was trying to trace where the signal was going. That evening, Zoe posted a long message in the group chat that Autumn immediately screenshotted and sent to me. Zoe was denying any involvement and claiming she was scapegoated just because she'd tried to protect everyone from me. She said anyone could have planted that camera and it was convenient how I was pushing the investigation toward her. Her message sounded panicked, though, using way too many exclamation points and repeating herself about how she would never do something like that. The detective had warned me not to engage with her directly, so I just saved the screenshot for evidence. 3 days later, the detective called with an update that made everything click into place. He'd gotten a warrant for the storage facility records and found a unit had been rented using an email address that matched one of Zoe's old accounts from when we'd all shared Netflix passwords years ago. The payment traced back to a prepaid card that was purchased at the shipping store near the storage facility. He said they were pulling surveillance footage from the store to see who bought it. Some of our friends still refused to believe any of it, even with all this evidence piling up. Harper sent Autumn a message saying she didn't care about proof because her feeling of safety mattered more than facts, and she couldn't risk being wrong about me. Reading that hurt more than I expected because it meant even with clear evidence, some people would never come back. I spent that night accepting that not everyone would believe the truth, and somehow that had to be okay. The next week, I found a therapist named Brielle, who specialized in trauma from betrayal and stalking situations. Her office was in this quiet building downtown, and she had this calm way of talking that made me feel less crazy about everything. She helped me understand why I'd developed this need to constantly check my locks and look over my shoulder and scan every room I entered. We worked on strategies to feel safe without letting the paranoia take over my whole life. She taught me breathing exercises for when I felt that panic rising in my chest. 2 weeks into therapy, I felt stable enough to go back to work part-time with HR, checking in twice a week to make sure I was doing okay. My coworkers didn't know all the details, but they were supportive in this quiet way that helped. Having normal conversations about spreadsheets and meetings and lunch orders reminded me there was still a regular world outside this nightmare. It felt good to focus on something besides evidence and police reports for a few hours each day. Then the detective called with the biggest update yet. The camera's purchase history had been traced through its serial number, and it was bought with the same prepaid card used for the storage unit rental. Even better, the shipping store's surveillance footage clearly showed Zoe buying the prepaid card 2 days before she'd reactivated my old iPad. The detective said the evidence was overwhelming, but warned me the case would still take months to work through the legal system. Brennan called me the next day saying he'd gotten my phone carrier records through their customer portal and pulled up the SMS logs from that night. He showed me the printout at another Starbucks meeting and pointed to the blank space between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., where 0 text messages were sent from my actual phone number. The only way those messages could have come from my number was through iMessage on the iPad using my Apple ID, which meant we finally had proof the messages weren't from my actual phone. I took photos of every page and emailed them to the detective handling my case. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Stella to the whole group chat that I'd been removed from weeks ago, but Autumn screenshot it for me immediately. Stella explained about finding the camera in her closet and how the building's entry logs showed Zoe's guest code was used at 2:47 a.m. that night when I was home 20 minutes away. She wrote that she owed me an apology, but understood if I couldn't forgive her yet, and that she was sorry for not listening when I tried to show her evidence. The courthouse downtown had a whole section for restraining orders, and I spent 3 hours filling out paperwork describing everything that had happened with dates and evidence attached. The clerk said it would take 2 weeks for a hearing, but gave me a temporary order that went into effect immediately. Back home, I opened a password manager app Brennan recommended and spent the entire afternoon changing every single password to random generated strings of letters and numbers that I'd never remember without the app. My Amazon, Netflix, banking, social media, email accounts all got new passwords that looked like gibberish but were supposedly unhackable. The group chat exploded over the next few days with people taking sides and arguing about who knew what when. Joey sent one message saying he didn't care about evidence because the whole thing made him uncomfortable, and then blocked everyone who defended me, including Autumn. Mia went completely silent and removed herself from all group chats without saying anything to anyone. Harper kept sending messages about not wanting to pick sides and how we all needed to heal separately before trying to be friends again. Meanwhile, Autumn was texting me updates every few hours and actually came over with takeout when I hadn't eaten all day. She said she felt guilty for not questioning things sooner and wanted to make up for it by being there now. Brielle's office had these soft blue walls and a white noise machine that made everything feel calm and safe. During our sessions, she'd ask me to describe what I was feeling without using the word betrayed, which was harder than it sounded. We worked on this exercise where I'd write down thoughts about the friend group and then rewrite them, focusing on my own actions and choices instead of what they did to me. She helped me see how I was still checking Harper's Instagram every hour, even though she hadn't posted anything about me in weeks. We made a rule that I could only check social media once a day at 8 p.m., and I had to set a timer for 5 minutes. The hardware store had better deadbolts that cost $80 each, but I bought 2 anyway, plus a door reinforcement bar that wedged under the handle. I installed cameras that connected to my phone so I could check my apartment from anywhere. Autumn helped me plan different routes to work so I wasn't taking the same path every day, and we shared our locations with each other through our phones. My parents were confused but supportive when I explained why I needed them to have my therapist's number and the detective's contact info. 3 weeks after everything started, Stella texted asking if we could meet at the Coffee Bean on 3rd Street where there'd be lots of people around. She looked tired sitting across from me with her hands wrapped around her mug like she needed the warmth. She said she was sorry for not believing me and for being so scared that she couldn't even listen to my side. I told her I understood why she was terrified after seeing those photos and finding that camera in her closet. She said she'd been staying with her sister since finding the camera and still didn't feel safe in her apartment. We talked for 20 minutes about practical things like changing locks and installing security systems, but didn't try to pretend we were friends again. She paid for my coffee and said maybe we could text sometimes, but we both knew it would never be like before. 7 weeks after that party at Zoe's apartment, I was back at work full-time and had a routine that felt normal, even if it wasn't my old normal. Tuesday mornings were for Brielle, where we worked on building my sense of self, without needing 10 people to validate every decision. Brennan and I had lunch together on Thursdays, and talked about work stuff mostly, but he'd check in about how I was doing. Autumn came over for dinner on Sundays, and we'd watch shows that had nothing to do with anyone from the old group. The detective called with updates every couple weeks, but the case was moving through the system at its own pace, and I'd stopped waiting for closure from that. My new normal was smaller and quieter, but it was mine, and I'd built it myself, and that counted for something even if it wasn't what I'd planned. So what's your read? Was Zoe planning this all along, or did she just snap? Drop your thoughts below.